Hello, security pros. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us on today's ESA webinar, From the Hill, Economic and Legislative Updates Impacting ESA Members. As the U.S. economy begins to reopen, business owners are looking for ways to accelerate recovery. The latest relief package has greatly expanded cash funds available to business owners, but there's a lot of misinformation surrounding its provisions. In today's session, we are joined by former Senior Counsel to the U.S. Senate Finance Committee and Alliant Group National Managing Director, Dean Zerbe. Throughout this webinar, Dean will share his exclusive insight on the latest relief package, along with credits and incentives you need to know about. We'll also cover what impact the new White House will have on legislative and tax policies in 2021 and 2022. Today's webinar is hosted by ESA's Executive Management Professionals Group, or EMP Group. It's lonely at the top, but this group brings together executives from the security companies across the nation in a non-competitive way to share insight, challenges, and best practices. Small groups meet each month for discussions, and we'll get together in person at the EMP National Meeting at this year's ESA Leadership Summit, October 4 through 7 in Frisco, Texas. You must be an ESA member to join the EMP group, but you can join at esaweb.org. If you're planning on attending this year's ESA Leadership Summit, I'd like to remind you that early bird registration discounts expire this Friday. Join us as leaders gather at the Omni Frisco at the Dallas Star as we meet, network, share insight, all overlooking the Dallas Cowboys practice field. I'm Jillian Bateman, ESA's Chief Development Officer, and I'll be facilitating our discussion with Dean today. Before we dive in with our expert, I'd like to provide some tips for those of you joining us on your very first ESA webinar. Welcome. ESA, or the Electronic Security Association, is the largest and longest standing association serving the pro-installed electronic security and life safety industry. Our members are integrators, dealers, monitoring centers, and even manufacturers and service providers in the space. We are the voice of electronic security and life safety. If your company is a member of ESA, thank you. We hope you're taking advantage of all your ESA benefits to leverage growth and connections for your team. If your company is not yet a member of ESA, check us out. You'd be surprised at the power of membership. Get a feel for all of the ESA benefits, including savings on business insurance, training, sales team coaching, certifications that satisfy state licensing, and in some case are alternatives to NISET at esaweb.org. You will all be muted for the duration of this session, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. If a question or comment pops up at any point during today's session, click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and I'll pose all of our questions to Dean. We'll also be recording today's webinar so you can rewatch the on-demand session and share it with your colleagues. We realize your time is valuable and we appreciate you spending some of that time with us today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dean Zerbe.
Thanks so much, Jillian. I appreciate it. And great to be here with the good folks at ESA, one of our favorite groups to work with at Alliant Group. Just as a quick background, we work with companies and their CPA partners, helping them benefit from the various tax benefits and provisions that are out there. With ESA members alone, we've helped them get over $100 million in tax credits. So a very close relationship, and ESA as a clients and members are very, very good candidates for a lot of the tax provisions that are out there, the R&D tax credit that we worked on, and a new tax credit that I'm going to talk about, the employee retention credit at the end here that's out there temporarily as part of the COVID relief, something that you all want to very much take a hard look at to see if you qualify. Just a little bit more of a background on Alliant. We have approximately about 1,000 members, 1,000 staff across the nation and overseas. And you can see some of our board members here as well too that we've got. So just a little bit of a flavor for us and our work. Jillian already did a nice job of my background. I think you get the sense of it. I was on the Senate Finance Committee for a number of years and still stay close to that. I'm based here in DC, so I have a pretty good feel for what folks are thinking about and looking at in terms of taxes in Washington. Let's start with that and kind of set the stage. So we had the elections and had President Biden brought in. And with that, though, the Republicans also had a fairly good night as well, too, in terms of getting a much tighter House. It's only a few seats differing between the Democrats and Republicans in the House. And of course, the Senate is tied. So that makes it a very, very narrow, very thin journey for the Democrats to get through what they want. And it means primarily that they're going to be looking at reconciliation, which is a process moving bills that don't require 60 votes, don't really aren't subject to the filibuster rules. But the problem you've got, and you'll hear me discussing this repeatedly, is that with a 50-50 Senate and you're using reconciliation, you need all 50 votes. That every senator can be a kingmaker, and often is a kingmaker in terms of, well, I want this provision. No, I don't want that provision. So it's not an easy run to get through what they want. So you'll see that again, kind of animating our discussion here about what's going to happen on taxes. The kind of what's been passing lately, as you know, is a PPP extension, the loan program, the employment retention credit, which I want to talk about more here. That's actually been expanded since it initially got approved. And that's kind of just a preview of a little bit of the problem, is that folks, to the extent that they paid attention to the ERC, thought, well, it was an either or with PPP, and that was kind of the little brother to it. And quite frankly, it's gotten expanded and increased. So it's a very robust program all on its own. So that we've had some other provisions there, probably not of particularly strong interest to those listening, but there has been some tax provisions that have been put in kind of the end of days of the previous administration, and then with the new administration. And with the new administration, you had extension of employment. A lot of that's ending now. Certain checks, child credit being expanded, things of that nature. So that's where we've been right now. And so where we've got it is that the administration, in fact, they just announced, I was reading before we got on the air here, that they finally came to an agreement on the infrastructure bill. So the infrastructure bill is going to be a lot of money for bridges, roads, tunnels, rural internet, high speed, things of that nature. And there really won't be any tax increases in that. From at least what we're seeing early on, is that they're not going to have any of that. And it's going to be about $1 trillion bill. It's kind of several billion dollars, I beg your pardon, of new spending. So you'll get kind of these different numbers, but it's about $1 trillion. And they're expecting that to move and get that with Republican votes. Separate from that is the $3.5 trillion bill that you've probably read about in the newspapers, that is going to be a reconciliation bill. That's a much more, that's going to be a Democratic only bill. They're going to have to get the 50 votes, keep all the Democrats together, keep all the House members together to get that through. On the spending side, that's got all sorts of bells and whistles of expanding the child credit that was in place, Medicare, Medicaid, you name it, kind of the wish list of the folks on the Democratic side of the aisle. So to get there, they need to offset it or pay for it, at least most of it. And while they're going to pay for a fair amount of it by clawing back spending that was put out earlier for COVID relief and other things, they're going to then have to raise taxes to pay for a good deal of that. And we'll talk about a big piece of that on the IRS side here kind of at the end. But let's go through the provisions that they're looking at to pay for this bill, to basically find, I suspect they're trying to probably find in the order of $1.5 trillion, give or take, in tax increases to pay for this bill. So number one for them, and the president's campaigned on it, is the corporate tax rate. Corporate tax rate is 21. Biden has proposed to raise it to 28%. Right out of the block, you're going to see what I meant by every senator being able to hold this up. Senator Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, who's more on the moderate side of the Democratic Party, came out and said, well, yeah, I'm not for 28. I think 25 is the number we should have in the corporate tax rate. I do think there's probably several other Democrats that are sympathetic to that number too, but he's been the more vocal of it. So it's kind of like the old trading places move. You remember when the fellow said, well, Mr. Valentine has set the price. In this case, Senator Manchin set the rate 25. 25 is going to be what it is. They'll raise $100 billion for every point that they take the corporate rate up. So you'll get that, that'll happen. So it'll go up to 25. You're not going to get a tax on book income that was also proposed. It's not really ready for prime time. And there's quite a bit of grind from, again, the Democrats. Just for those listening, I'm not really talking about the Republicans because they're clearly not trying to get and aren't going to get any Republican votes in the House or Senate for this. It's all about keeping their Democrats home. So just for those who aren't familiar, that's why the whole discussion I'm doing is really about the Democrats. It's not a partisan point. It's just a reality point. So you'll get that. You may see them also putting in a new minimum tax as well too. As you may catch, there's been a lot of discussion about a minimum tax on an international level. We have a minimum tax that they're looking at putting in place there, and that would also raise a fair amount of money as well too. So corporate tax rate definitely going to go up. 199A. So I think for many of you familiar, this is kind of the 20% haircut that pass-throughs got in the tax bill, the tax reform bill that passed under President Trump. It's basically for all businesses below 400,000, and then for businesses above 400,000, it's kind of for the washed and the unwashed in terms of not for accountants, lawyers, and bankers and what have you, but yes, for manufacturers, architects, engineers, and what have you, get it. So Biden didn't really campaign on this. You have to kind of look at a footnote to see any commentary about it. But the idea that's been put out there, and Senator Wyden and the chairman of the Finance Committee, Democrat, has just put forward legislation that said, yes, we're going to phase this out for income over $400,000. However, we are going to expand it, expand the regime for all businesses, meaning lawyers, accountants, bankers that are below 400,000. I think that's kind of more of a optics, if you will, just to say, oh, well, we're doing this nice thing for smaller businesses while we're taking away this benefit. I would put this on the B. I think the corporate rate's going to go up. That's on the A list. It won't go up as much as the Dems want. Biden didn't want it, but it will go up. This, I would say, is on a B possibility. This is a provision that expires in 2025, as a number of the individual pass-through provisions from the tax reform bill do. What that means is, you can imagine, from a elected officials member, in other words, U.S. senators are not always thrilled to be making difficult votes that piss off a lot of people. They especially don't like to do it when they find out that a provision is going to go away in a couple of years anyway. So they think, tell me again, why am I taking this terrible vote? I'm going to be on the javelin receiving team, and yet this all is going to go away in 2 years. Why am I having to do this? Is the natural kind of outlook. That will play in it. I think also, for those of you listening who care about this, that it matters to them, it's a provision that members are not that familiar with on both sides of the aisle. There's probably a certain awareness, and there's maybe a growing awareness, but suffice to say, I would encourage you to educate your elected officials about the importance of this provision, your members, to your business, why it matters to you, how it impacts you in terms of jobs, job retention, good wages, you name it. I think that can have a difference, that members hear more about the value that's being brought to it. That's going to give them pause to think hard about whether they want to go after this provision. So that's where we are on 199A. I think it's more of a reach. It would be more if the Democrats are really kind of scrounging for dollars and kind of pulling up the cushions, looking for spare change, that they would look at this. 1031, probably not a huge interest for you all listening. This is kind of more on the real estate, and actually agriculture gets involved with this quite a bit. These are deferral on real estate transactions. I would kind of, again, put this in a B or C category. It doesn't raise a big amount of money. It will make a lot of folks pretty unhappy in this area. And so I think it'll again be something that they might reach for if they really need the funds, really more because the Aggies are going to get very unhappy about dealing with it. Depreciation, that has a natural phase out that's going on. Biden is proposing increasing that, accelerating, if you will, that. I don't know. I think that, again, because it's something that's already going away, members, again, that they're maybe looking for money. I'd put this as a B level for them, that they'd say, well, okay, I mean, this is something that's happening. Maybe we're not too bad about accelerating it. I don't think it's on their top of their to-do list, though, by any means. These are some of the business credits, kind of just reminding you, and the child credits on there on kind of things that they're looking at doing on their side, that it's not all tax increases, that they are looking at providing various tax incentives and credits out there as well too. Energy efficiency, these are things that they're looking at doing a lot of. Solar and wind as well too are going to be strong candidates that they've already have in legislation that's passed at least committee, and that they'll be looking at encouraging. So for those, I know it's a little bit of field from you all as ESA members primarily, but if you're involved in the energy efficiency side, I think they're going to be doing more on that to encourage folks going forward. This is the big one, though. The individual tax rates, they are absolutely going to do this. They will be raising the top rates up to 39.6%. And that will happen. Biden's campaigned on it. There's a consensus in the Democratic Party to do it. And along with this, there's a 3.8% add-on tax that's out there. They have made clear that they're going to broaden that reach so that it kind of covers everybody. So the way that you can think about it is it's really 39.6 plus 3.8 that you're going to be having on the individual side. That will happen. Let me take a pause there, though, to talk about effective dates. So the administration, in its green book, which is kind of the guide to, if you will, of what an administration's tax proposals are put out by every administration every year, traditionally, is they themselves said, we're going to do this effective January 1st, 2022. So this will be going forward. I don't expect the Congress to go against what the Green Book in this case did. We'll talk about the effective date for capital gains in a minute, which is a little bit more of a complicated journey. But I would expect the effective date to be January 1st, 2022. Same with the corporate rate, same with all these changes. That's really what they're pushing for. The reason for that is kind of timing. Again, maybe just to take a pause on that. What I'm expecting to happen on timing of this is that Congress is right now, we're already, almost into August. They're just now kind of getting the engine going on the infrastructure deal, which really is hand in glove then with the bigger deal, the $3.5 trillion deal that's going to be the tougher lift for them because of the tax increases out there, that they will be dealing with that come the fall. And so the expectation is really late September, early October is when that would begin to show up at the president's desk. So you'd have it then, and then you can imagine, well, with too much going, they're not going to go back. They're going to say, great, we'll start all this January 1st, 2022. So that's where you are on the individual rates. Payroll tax, the administration had campaigned quite a bit actually on the idea of increasing the payroll tax. That is not going to happen. The reason for that is fairly straightforward. As you can see at the bottom there, you can't do payroll Social Security issues through the reconciliation. Reconciliation is a very kind of tight dance of what is and isn't allowed on a reconciliation bill. It's got to be provisions that impact spending taxes and whatever you are to 10 years. And there's certain kind of third rails, this being one of them, that you can't get in. The classic example, what you couldn't do in reconciliation that you already saw is you can't, like, for instance, do minimum wage because its impact is indirect in terms of taxes, spending, things like that. Payroll tax is just a straight prohibition. They will not move this. You're going to need 60 votes you're really going to need to have some kind of grand deal, a la Reagan and Tip O'Neill, to get a change in the payroll taxes. So that is not in the cards at all. Capital gains. So I know this is of interest to a lot of folks listening. So let's go through capital gains a bit here. So what they're going to do on capital gains, what they propose to do, you can see kind of current law there. It's at 20% plus a 3.8% add-on, 23.8. Here's what they're proposing is that for folks with $1 million in income, that they want to raise it to the top ordinary income rate, meaning the new 39.6 plus the 3.8% add-on from there. So a very significant increase in capital gains that's being proposed. There have been a number of Democrats who have balked at having the capital gains rate raised that high. And you'd expect dividends, I should add, going at the same rate. They tend to kind of go hand in hand. And so I don't expect that to happen. The pushback from more moderate Democrats is that they won the traditional argument of just, well, we don't want to discourage investment and we want to encourage people to take risk. Arguments probably many of you are familiar with listening. The other one's a little bit odd or different, kind of one of those only in Washington things. Everything here, like I said, is really meant to get revenues to pay for, offset the amount of money that they're going to be putting out in new spending. The difficulty you run into is when you raise capital gains that high, you lose money. People just sit on their hands and they don't sell. The feeling is that the sweet spot for capital gains is, in terms of maximizing revenue, is around 28%, so 25 plus a 3.8 would kind of get you there. So that's the other issue that's driving where we are in terms of capital gains. So we've had a number of Democratic senators and congressmen talking about this, saying they're not comfortable with going to the OI rates. I would expect it to be at around 28%, given that, because they're going to just have to accept what it is. And plus, just some folks will want the higher rate just because, by God, we're going to show those rich guys. There'll be too much pushback saying this is crazy. We're going to not help the economy. We're going to harm investment, and we're actually reducing revenues. In terms of the effective date, so for those who've paid attention to this, the effective date was first put out by the administration in the Green Book to be April 7th of this year. I be candid with you, as I don't think that there was a lot of thought or detail put into that when that date was put out there. And it's not something that Democrats on the Hill are rallying to and saying, by God, we're going to do it. It's extremely rare for the Congress to do retroactive on any tax provision, with the exception of being provisions that are anti-abuse and where they have clearly made, not just a tax shelter, and you're saying, okay, as of this date that we're announcing it, this is going to be the effective date, even if it takes us a year to ultimately pass the legislation, this is the effective date. That is what effective dates that are retroactive tend to the model for them. Here, just for the administration, kind of by your leave saying, well, here it is. I don't see it. I don't think the Democrats are going to get at all comfortable with that in terms of doing that. In other words, I think folks that are already not crazy about raising the rates are going to for sure say, well, we're not doing this retroactive. That's just going to cause more heartache and pain. And then going back to scoring, which you could see as kind of a broken record in this conversation, you actually raise more money if you were to say, put out an effective date of January 1st, 2022, and is going back to our discussion, this doesn't pass till, say, October. Joint tax, which does our official scorekeeping, will recognize that you're basically creating an Oklahoma land rush. In other words, that people for the next 2 months are going to then sell, and you'll raise monies, and they'll get credit for that. So they'll look at it and say, this is crazy. We avoid, kind of a bad vote and a bad optical vote in terms of doing something retroactive, and we don't pick up the monies from them. Here, we can actually look
fair play, if you will, and we are going to pick up more revenue because we're providing this window to do it. So that's the expectation on capital gains. What I would say for those who are caring mightily about this, that you've got a sale or you're expecting a sale or something like that, I'd say two things. One, you'll have my point of contact information at the end. You can certainly email me as things progress, and I'll try to give you a better sense of it. But what I would, setting that aside, what I really tell you is that the Democrats will begin to have to show their cards of their actual draft language here really within the next 2-3 weeks. I would think that we'll start to see it. If not, come September. Why is that? Because when you're getting your scores of what a provision raises, the first thing the Joint Committee on Taxation asks you is what's your effective date, which if you think about it makes perfect sense of, okay, I can't score this until you tell me when it's going to begin. So they'll immediately say, well, what's the effective date? And you'll see that. And while it might go more generous, it won't go the other direction. So I would expect that, you may see effective date of enactment. I'd be pretty stunned. I think I and almost everyone in Washington, if it was, we're going back to the April 7th date, more likely you'll see them kind of lining everything up at January 1st, 2022, because then again, it'll be kind of a little bit the flower that sticks out in terms of, why are we having this one effective date for this provision and not for the other? So that's what we're expecting there. Carried interest, probably not of too strong of interest, no pun intended for those listening. This is, primarily your private equity folks. I think their thought was, well, we'll take care of this because we're going to have the cap gains rate at the OI rates. Given I think they're not going to do that. They may look at having some specific provisions to deal with carried interest. But I would expect those again to very much be for deals going forward and what have you. We'll see how good they are at addressing it. It's a provision that members love to talk about, but somehow never gets kind of put to bed. Deductions, you're also going to see kind of a bring back of some of the hidden deductions that are out there that they'll look to raise monies as well too. So look for those as well. They probably won't raise as much money just because you're going to have the top rates coming in, and you're going to be dealing with only the 400K and over crowd. But I would expect you'll see some of that going forward. This is some of the credit. This is again kind of on the plus side of things that they're looking at doing. Certainly EITC. They've already kind of put in place in the previous bill what they wanted, they being the Democrats. I would expect them really just to kind of continue what they did on EITC and child credit going forward. Some of these things that are here, I don't really expect to see the light of day. One thing that actually might be of interest for you all listening, though, ESA, is there's a strong push by the real estate community to get a credit to allow for the retrofit of buildings that were office space to become rental or condos or co-ops or whatever, but basically trying to deal with the anticipated falling out of people not coming back to work and folks beginning to empty out of the downtown area. So just something as kind of a cloud on the horizon that there may be a world of kind of retrofits and new design work, and I think needing all your good work and services from ESA members perhaps coming on the horizon. Two other points I wanted to make sure we talked about: wealth tax. I apologize, I don't think I have a slide for it, but a number of folks have been concerned about a wealth tax being put in place. This has been put forward by, again, a number of the more fervent part of the Democratic Party. I don't expect that to happen. I think in part, setting aside, I beg your pardon, kind of constitutional issues that they face, it's one of those that it just isn't really cooked yet. They're looking at it for kind of folks over $50 million, and trying to put something like that in place is a lot easier said than done. Biden did not campaign on it, and that matters a lot. Members, even when they're dealing with a provision, they're maybe not that crazy about it. The president's campaigned on something and they feel that they've gotten a mandate. The president's gotten a mandate for that provision. That tends to give members a little bit of breathing room, at least particularly early on during the honeymoon period for a new president. Well, he campaigned on it, it's something he's out there and he's wanted. They can at least kind of justify within reason taking maybe a difficult vote by saying, well, I wanted to let the president have the chance to enact his agenda. You get the idea. So we'll see. But wealth tax, he did not campaign on. Biden didn't campaign on. I don't expect that to go. Estate and gift, you can see kind of where we are right now in terms of it goes back in 2026 to 2025. And then here's what they want to do on the Biden side is a pretty aggressive change, is that they want to raise the top rate to 45, lower the exemption amount to 3.5, and eliminate stepped up basis. The stepped up basis being the big new way of doing things that they've got. So let's kind of take them one at a time. The easiest one is raising the top rate. That I think they'll get, sure, why not? And they could do it for, say, estates over 50 million as a, for instance. It raises a little bit of money. It's more, I think, to show, by God, we showed those guys more than anything. But I think they'll get that and what have you. So you'll have the top rate. I think they would go ahead and do that. The exemption amount, getting down to 3.5, again, the exemption amount goes back down to 5 million index for inflation starting in 2026 as it is from where it is right now, which is $11 million plus an extension, husband, wife. Again, it's this problem where members are really going to be sensitive about, why am I doing this? Why am I taking this difficult vote? This is already going to go back quite a bit come 2026. This seems to be an unnecessary vote that is just going to annoy a lot of folks. And obviously you'll have some folks in the Democratic Party that are, you bet, let's do it. But I think you'll have a number of Democrats that are very unhappy about taking this kind of a difficult vote. So I do not think they will get the exemption amount changed. Maybe they could get away with accelerating back to the 5 million index for inflation. Again, I don't know quite what that gets you, and I think it's also a little bit in terms of how much money they're going to need and how much they're going to raise gets into it too. The stepped up in basis is really putting your hand in a raccoon sack, as I mentioned. This gets and the Democrats themselves have already had a number of members writing letters saying, we've got to protect family farms, we've got to protect small business owners from this. So there's a big concern. The difficulty you've got is when you say, well, we want to protect the small business owners, we want to protect the family farms. It's the definition of that. It's easy to say, but it's difficult to draft for that. They're trying to deal with it by saying, well, we'll let you pay it over, say, 15 years, the tax that's involved. Well, you won't have to pay it until you sell the family business or sell the family farm. So meaning grandpa dies and then the niece takes over and she holds on to it. So then when she sells it to some non-family member, then the tax would come due. It all is pretty grindy. And the other difficulty is once you put in an exemption, really what you're trying to do is to find people out. In other words, what you're trying to prevent happening is Ted Turner saying, well, hey, I've got a bunch of buffalo. I'm a farmer too. I should get in on this deal. So that's the difficulty. And I think it's something that just, again, isn't really been cooked, isn't kind of ready for prime time. I think it's where you get into this difficulty of when one member can hold things up. This is where they'll hold it up and say, I don't want to move this. We're not getting a fix that we need. And then you balance it with, well, how much money are we going to raise? What do we need to do? And everything like that. So that's where it is. Before we go into the employment retention credit, two things I want to make sure we covered is SALT, state and local tax deduction. The number of Democrats in the House side have basically written a letter saying, hell no, we won't go unless we get some kind of relief on SALT. Now, I think they've kind of backed off wanting repeal because that would be extremely expensive and really not good politics for the Democrats. That it skews overwhelmingly to help very, very high-end individuals to repeal SALT. So I think what they will do if they do anything, but I think they might do this, is just kind of a fig leaf of saying right now the cap is $10,000. As you can say, well, we're going to increase the cap to, pick your number, 15,000, 20,000, but we're going to phase it out for folks making over $400,000. So you kind of give it with one hand and take it with the other. So that might be something to kind of as a bone to folks to say we've dealt with it. Plus, they've got another issue, which is that another way to maybe finesse this is a number of states are reenacting or enacting 2.0 workarounds on the SALT deductions through their pass-through entities. The previous administration's Treasury Department shut those down and shot them down. It may be that the new administration may take a more benign view towards them and effectively accomplish regulatorily what they want to avoid having to do statutorily. So we'll see. That might be one way to skin it. Other than that, I really expect it'll be kind of something minimal that they'll do on SALT. The other thing I want to mention, so you can kind of, if you're, keeping track at home, you're probably thinking, okay, well, it seems like got a pretty big hole to fill in terms of the taxes. They'll do all right with certainly the corporate and the individual rate will get them, quite a bit of dollars, and some of the other things that they'll do. The big asterisk that I expect them to use that they didn't use for the infrastructure bill is that they are going to fund the IRS. They're going to really zoop up funding for the IRS, give them more authorities and tools and what have you. And in the Treasury Department's view, this will raise $700 billion over 10 years through expanded audit, things like that. The official congressional scorekeepers have not been nearly as optimistic about the amount of money that would be raised. There'd be some money raised by an expanded audit presence, but not anywhere near the levels that the administration is thinking. But I think what they'll do is they'll kind of go with their numbers. If you'll kind of dream a dream and just say, well, we're going to fully fund the IRS for 10 years, and we're going to give them authorities. One of the big authorities, they're going to make banks start reporting on your accounts and what have you, and that well, we'll see how that works out. I think it's again something that hasn't really maybe been fully considered and vetted in terms of how it's going to work, but suffice to say, it's kind of the magic feather that they'll hold on to and say, well, there's $700 billion, so that takes care of a lot of the funding, and away we go. So that would be the last part of what they'll do, and I think they'll do that for sure. So you should be aware that you'll see a more robust IRS presence kind of going forward. Let me just pause there for just a second. And Jillian, I didn't know if we had any questions at the moment. Otherwise, we'll take them at the end on anything I said about taxes and what's going on with taxes at this point. Otherwise, I want to talk just a little bit about this employee retention credit.
Absolutely. We do have a few comments here asking about expanded PPP and really digging into the ERC. So it sounds like we're going to get there.
Right there. All right. Well, we'll get to it right now. You bet. So I'm glad that question came. PPP, that ship's kind of sailed, the funding and everything like that, and Congress isn't going to revisit it. But the one I really wanted to highlight for you, so the employee retention credit, it's not capped or limited like the PPP is. So when I give you this dollar figure, I don't want you to think, oh, okay, well, the Congress estimated it as $80 billion that they put out there for the employee retention credit. But like I said, there's not a cap. Everyone that can take it, just like the mortgage. But we do these estimates. But I just want to give you a sense of the size of this program. And it's been expanded a couple of times since it was first put in place, making it much more business friendly to qualify, making it easier to qualify, and particularly with this interaction with PPP. It's much more in sync or in harmony with PPP now, as opposed to an either or. And the thing I want you to think, and we've been just working with folks left and right in this area, and I guess the things I want to just really pound into you, to be blunt, because it's such a powerful credit, is that obviously if you've got had a reduction in revenues, that's fine. That's a very good way to qualify and what have you. But so many people just are target fixated that that's the only way to qualify, and that's just completely nuts. Half of the people that we are working with, and we're working with thousands to qualify, are getting qualified because their business has been subject to a full or partial shutdown or order of, that's impacted their business, beyond just a shutdown, but it's impacted their business. So that even if we've got no end of businesses that have actually had a growth in their business, seen their business expanding, because you really need to think about this as trying to encourage employment, encourage people to hire new people, retain people. You get the whole run. So don't be just, well, I'm doing okay, or I'm doing pretty fine. If you had any kind of situation where a federal, state, local, county, and OSHA, any kind of order basically had here's the words to listen to, more than nominal impact on your business and how you do your business, then you are a good candidate for the ERC. And that's how we're getting half of these companies to qualify for it. And so it's a $7,000 per quarter credit per employee that's involved. So you'll see some examples here. The dollars really add up quick for it. And of course, now we're seeing, and if you haven't applied yet, that's fine. We can go back and get you squared away. And as we all are reading now, we're kind of back in the soup again in terms of masks and distancing and who knows what all. So, something to be aware of. But all these are, you can see kind of these different ways that folks are qualifying that's listed here on this screen. And another thing that's interesting too is, and just to give you a sense of the breadth, it's also if you, for instance, had a supplier that was impacted by a government order that included a federal, any government order, shutdown, partial shutdown. If it's a supplier that, well, we used to have this product and now we didn't, we had to, again, had this more than nominal impact. We had to change how we did our business. That's a good way that you can qualify too. So again, it's just something that's a lot of ways that the IRS has been really friendly to taxpayers in terms of giving them this other path forward to claim it. So I just wanted you to be aware. Again, you can see this kind of that you can claim both on it. If you've got employees, even if you've got over 500 employees, I would say still talk to us in terms of what you're doing. We found that because of the way headcount works, and who counts for an employee, it's actually kind of a more complicated determination than that. So don't be put aside if you're at 700 employees or something like that. Again, it's something you want to take a look at. And again, it's this full and partial. I can't emphasize this enough. It's this separate test that you can alternatively qualify from as opposed to the revenue. You can look at, hey, my company's doing well. We're doing all right. We're hiring people. Yes, we've had to, change how we do business. Yes, that's had an impact. Those are all, music in terms of getting this credit. But here's kind of what I wanted you to see. Here's a security company right here. You can see the revenue there, the number of employees. Look at that credit. And I don't have it for sure, but I would strongly suspect this is for just one quarter. And that's how powerful this credit can be out there. So I really, you can see it there in terms of the impact that we've got. There's another example, just again, 10 employees, but you can see $65,000 in credits, one quarter that they got that, and what have you. So you can go back and it just, I'm glad we're talking about it, Jillian, just because, as you can see, it's just a very powerful incentive that Congress put in place. Really, again, I can't emphasize enough. Think of it as an employment credit. They wanted to help and encourage employers to retain people, retain folks, but also to bring in new hires. They want to get people off the sidelines and back into jobs and encourage and help employers that are making that happen. So that's really what this is all about. And again, I'd encourage you, we've worked so well with ESA members. This is a chance. We're happy to get on the phone. We're working with companies day and night to qualify for this. Our folks are extremely familiar with the 102 pages of rulings that the IRS has put out and can guide you through whether this makes sense or not. So with that, I wanted to give you my contact information there so everyone's got it. And feel free to reach out. Jennifer Groff, who works very closely with ESA as well too. Certainly you can contact her and we'll get you to the right people. But so there's kind of the good news. I know that all this tax I've been talking about beforehand has been, good Lord, it's all coming right at you in terms of new taxes. But this is the silver lining is this good news on tax relief that you've got. So, sharpen your pencils, take advantage of it going forward here. as you're having to deal with kind of the whole array of tax that's coming at you. And with that, Jillian, I don't know if we have any other questions, and otherwise let people kind of get on with their afternoon.
For sure. If you have a question for Dean, you can go ahead and type that in the Q&A panel of your control panel. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, you can comment there about any questions you'd like for me to pitch to Dean. Jennifer and her group were actually at a leadership summit a couple years ago, and I came back, I told my husband about it. He owns a company in Pittsburgh that does mostly AV, but some security. And after he took the time to dive into this, the R&D tax credit that he got was just eye-opening. So I really would encourage you to dig in here and find out more with Alliant Group, because they can save you a lot of money. Does anybody have any specific questions about ERC or any of the tax credits that Dean kind of went through? You can type them there in your chat. Thank you, Chelsea. We have worked with Alliant Group for a few years. They are so easy to work with and have helped us a ton with the R&D tax credit.
That's very kind, Chelsea, and I'm thrilled to hear that. And that would be the only thing I'd say. We've kind of been talking about ESA just because it's the new kid on the block, if you will. But certainly all you all listening, ESA clients, ESA members rather, are very, very good candidates for the R&D tax credit. The thing to remember is it's an applied credit, applied R&D, and so it it can be a benefit for you to very much look at a very strong incentive for ESA members to take a hard look at. Go ahead, though. I guess we've got a question here, Jillian.
Yeah, can you briefly explain PPP forgiveness with expenses? And just to reiterate, you can get the ERC even if you did get PPP forgiveness.
Right. What I'm going to do, Angela, is I'll have Jennifer send to Jillian kind of a one sheet that we can get out to everybody, so I can make sure I get this exactly right. But I believe in kind of a nutshell, it's just you can't double count. Before, when it was just, well, either you're black or you're white kind of a deal, you can't take both. They said, no, you can take both. We just don't want you to, these employees and these employees, you can't deal with it. And what we find in practice, Angela, is that's very easy to manage. I mean, to say, okay, yeah, here's who you got the benefit for the PPP. Here's who we're going to have you take advantage of with the ERC. And so I think that's it, but it works out quite well for everybody involved.
Thanks, Dean. I'm just going to give you a minute further to ask any questions you might have. Just checking in on Facebook now. If we don't have any further questions, I want to thank you again for your time on today's call. As a reminder, the webinar was recorded, and you'll get an email tomorrow with a link to the copy of the recording, so you can rewatch that video and share it with your colleagues. I want to thank everybody for joining us on the call, and we'll see you on the next ESA webinar. Dean, thanks for everything.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Cheers all. Have a good afternoon.
Bye, everyone.